On the day I planned to retire, my doctor called me. Your daughter-in-law is poisoning you. I sat frozen in my corner office, 30 years of work behind me, a wife in the ground, and a son who'd grown cold. They wanted my company and my money. What they didn't know, I'd already changed everything, and I was patient. Hello, everyone. Today's story was inspired by a viewer submission and adapted into a full story just for you. If you'd like to share your own story, the submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Let me take you back 14 months to the spring before that phone call. My name doesn't matter as much as what I built. 30 years of hauling myself out of bed before sunrise, growing a logistics company from one rented truck into a business worth tens of millions. I did it with my wife, Linda, beside me the whole way. Then, 2 years ago, cancer took her in 8 months. After that, the house felt like a museum of someone else's life. My son Daniel was all I had left. So when Daniel told me he was getting married, I was happy, genuinely. He brought Vanessa to dinner, and she was everything you'd want on paper. Warm, attentive. She laughed at my old stories and asked about Linda like she actually cared. I remember thinking my boy had finally found someone good. They married fast. 3 months, courthouse, small reception. I paid for it and didn't ask questions. Young people move quickly these days, I told myself. Then came the part that should have warned me. Vanessa suggested they move into the family home. It's too big for one man, she said, holding my hand across the table. Let us take care of you. You've worked your whole life. It's our turn now. Daniel nodded along. And I, a lonely old man rattling around in an empty house, said yes before I'd even finished my coffee. At first, it was good. The house had noise in it again. Vanessa cooked every meal. She made my coffee exactly how I liked it. Brought it to me each morning before I left for the office. She handled my appointments, my pills, my schedule. I stopped doing things for myself because she insisted. Let me, she'd say, and take it from my hands. I was grateful. I told my friends at the club I'd gotten lucky, that my daughter-in-law treated me like her own father. Some of them gave me strange looks. I ignored them, but around 4 months in, my body started failing me. Tired all the time. Dizzy spells climbing the stairs I'd climbed for 20 years. My hands shook when I held my morning cup. I went to the doctor twice, ran tests, and they found nothing. Stress, one said. Age, said another. I believed them because why wouldn't I? I kept working. Work was the one place I still felt like myself, the one place Vanessa didn't manage. I told everyone I'd retire soon, hand the reins over, finally rest. I had no idea that resting was exactly what someone in my house was counting on. The decline crept up slow enough that I kept explaining it away. By the 6th month, I couldn't make it through a full day at the office without needing to sit down. My doctor put me on iron supplements, then on something for my blood pressure. Nothing helped for long. I'd feel a little better, then worse again. I started thinking maybe this was just how it ended for men like me. You work your whole life, and then your body sends the bill. Vanessa was always there for it. Every time I felt sick, she fussed over me, tucked blankets around my legs, brought me tea and toast. You need rest, she'd say. Let Daniel handle more at the company. You don't have to carry everything anymore. She said it gently, but she said it often. That was the first thing that struck me as odd, looking back. The constant pressure to step away, to hand things over. I was 58, not 80, and she talked about my retirement like it was overdue by a decade. The second thing was the isolation. My old friends stopped coming around. When I asked Vanessa about it, she'd say they'd called and she didn't want to tire me, so she told them I was resting. My fishing buddy Frank left 3 messages I never got. When I finally reached him myself, he sounded hurt. I thought you didn't want to see me anymore, he said. I didn't understand it then. Daniel changed too. My son, who used to call me about everything, barely spoke to me now. When he did, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He deferred to Vanessa on everything, even small things, even my own household. One night, I came down for water and heard them talking low in the kitchen. I caught only a few words. Vanessa's voice, sharp, the estate, and how much longer. Daniel said something I couldn't hear. Then they went quiet when my foot hit the stair. I told myself they were planning their future. Worried about money, like all young couples. I didn't let myself think the other thing. You don't, when it's your own son. But the doubts started piling up. Why did I only feel sick at home and never on the days I traveled for work? Why did the dizziness fade on a 3-day business trip and come roaring back the morning I returned and drank my coffee? I almost saw it then. The answer was right in front of me, in a porcelain cup Vanessa handed me every single morning with a smile. I didn't see it. I was tired and grieving, and I wanted so badly to believe I had a family that loved me. So I pushed the thought down and kept going to work, kept drinking the coffee, kept telling myself retirement would fix everything. Retirement day was 3 weeks away. I had no idea it would be the day I learned the truth. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story so far, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. All right, let's get back to it. The morning of my retirement, Vanessa made me a special breakfast: eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and my usual coffee. She even put a little candle on a muffin, like it was a birthday. 30 years, she said, kissing my cheek. You earned this. Daniel stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, nodding. I ate every bite. I drank the whole cup. Then I drove to the office for my last day. It was a good day, the kind you remember. My staff threw a party in the conference room. There was a cake, a banner, speeches from people who'd been with me 20 years. They gave me a watch. I shook every hand in the building. For a few hours, I forgot how tired I'd been. I felt like the man I used to be. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dr. Patel, my physician. The week before, at a routine checkup, he'd run a full panel of blood work because I'd complained again about the fatigue. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad it didn't. Are you sitting down? He asked. I told him I was. His voice was careful, the way doctors talk when something is wrong. Your results came back, he said. We found elevated levels of a heavy metal in your blood, significant levels. This isn't something that happens by accident or from age. This is from repeated exposure, small amounts over a long period of time. I didn't say anything. I just listened to my own heartbeat. Where do you eat most of your meals? He asked. At home? Does someone prepare your food? My daughter-in-law, I said. The words came out flat. There was a pause on the line. I have to be direct with you, Dr. Patel said. The pattern we're seeing, the steady accumulation, it's consistent with deliberate, ongoing poisoning. I'd be failing you if I didn't say that plainly. You need to be very careful about what you consume, and you may need to involve the authorities. I sat in my corner office, the watch they'd given me on my wrist, the party noise still drifting down the hall. 30 years of work behind me, Linda gone, and my own family slowly killing me one cup of coffee at a time. I thanked him. I told him I understood. I asked him to keep the records safe and to say nothing to anyone. He agreed, though he urged me to call the police. I said I would handle it. Then I sat there a long while. I thought about the candle that morning, the kiss on my cheek. You earned this. Thought about Vanessa's voice in the kitchen saying how much longer. I felt a lot of things in that chair: grief, rage, but mostly something cold and clear settled over me. I drove home that evening. Vanessa met me at the door, smiling, holding out a fresh cup of tea. I took it, and I smiled back. I held that cup of tea and pretended to drink it. I brought it to my lips, let it touch but not pass. When Vanessa turned to the stove, I poured most of it into a potted plant by the window. I'd done this once. By the end of the week, I'd have it down to a routine. That first night, I lay awake making rules for myself. I would eat nothing she prepared. I'd act exactly as sick before, maybe a little worse, so she'd suspect nothing. And I would find proof, because a doctor's phone call and a father's grief would not be enough to stop these people. The next morning, the performance began. I let Vanessa make my coffee. I carried it to the den, complained about feeling weak, and emptied the cup down the bathroom sink. At meals, I pushed food around my plate and slipped most of it into a napkin or fed it to the dog when no one watched, though I worried about the dog and started flushing it instead. When I was alone, I ate crackers and canned food from a box I hid in my car trunk, bottled water I bought myself. It was a strange way to live in your own house. Within 4 days, something happened that told me everything. I felt better. The dizziness eased. My hands stopped shaking when I poured my own water. The fog in my head lifted a little more each morning. Dr. Patel had been right. Whatever was making me sick, I was no longer swallowing it. That should have brought me relief. Instead, it made me sick in a different way because it meant it was true. Someone in this house was doing this on purpose. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That weekend, while Daniel and Vanessa were out, I bought a small camera, the kind people use as a baby monitor. I hid it on a high shelf in the kitchen, angled at the counter and the stove, and connected it to my phone. It took 2 days. On a Tuesday morning, I sat in my car down the street and watched the live feed. Vanessa moved around the kitchen, calm, unhurried. She made my coffee. Then she opened a drawer, took out a small bottle, and tapped a measured amount of clear liquid into my cup. She stirred it, she wiped the spoon. Then she carried the cup toward the den with a smile already forming on her face. I watched it twice to be sure I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't. But the part that broke something in me came that evening. Daniel was in the kitchen when she did it again, preparing my tea. He saw her measure the liquid. He saw her stir it in. He said nothing. He just looked away and kept scrolling his phone. My son knew. My son had known all along. That was the moment I stopped being their victim. Knowing was not the same as winning. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. The next week, I told Vanessa I had follow-up appointments for my health. It was the perfect cover. It got me out of the house for hours at a time, and it explained why I kept leaving on my own. She encouraged it. The more doctors poked at me without finding the real cause, the safer she felt. But I wasn't going to doctors. I was building a case. First, I hired a private investigator named Reyes, a former police detective who came recommended by a contact at my bank. I sat across from him in his small office and told him everything. The blood work, the camera footage, my son standing there saying nothing. Reyes didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, he said. He told me to keep doing exactly what I was doing, stay alive, stay quiet, and let him dig. What he found over the next 2 weeks turned my stomach. Vanessa was not who she claimed to be. The warm woman who married my son had a trail behind her. She'd been married once before, to an older man in another state. He'd died 2 years into the marriage. The official cause was heart failure, but there'd been questions, an inheritance dispute, a family that suspected something and could never prove it. She'd walked away with a settlement and a new name in a new city. Then she met my son. It was a pattern. I was not her first. Reyes also pulled what he could on the money. Daniel and Vanessa were drowning in debt. Credit cards, a second mortgage on a property I didn't even know they owned, loans against money they didn't have yet. And here was the part that made it all make sense. They had borrowed against their expected inheritance. They had shown lenders documents about my estate, my company, my assets. They were spending my death before it happened. They needed me gone, and they needed it soon. I sat with all of it spread across my kitchen table one night while they slept upstairs. The PI report, the old newspaper clipping about the first husband, the bank records, my own blood work from Dr. Patel. I want to be honest about what I felt, because anger is the easy part of a story like this. The hard part was the grief. I kept coming back to Daniel. I raised that boy. I taught him to ride a bike, drove him to college, gave him a job and a future. And he had watched a woman poison his own father and chosen her over me. Not out of fear, I'd come to learn. Out of greed. There was a moment sitting there when I almost called the police and ended it simply. But simple wasn't enough. They had planned my death down to the dollar. They had taken my trust and used it as a weapon. If they wanted my estate so badly, I decided I would build them a trap out of it. The first rule of the trap was simple. They had to believe it was working, so I got worse. I leaned into the role. I moved slower around the house, gripped the railing harder going up the stairs, let my voice go thin and tired. I complained about my legs, my heart, my failing memory. I forgot conversations we'd had. At dinner, I'd set down my fork halfway through and say I had no appetite anymore. I watched Vanessa's eyes when I did it. I saw the satisfaction she tried to hide. Of course, I wasn't actually consuming anything she made. Away from the house, I was eating well, sleeping well, getting my strength back. But at home, I was a dying man, and I made sure they had a front row seat. It lowered their guard exactly as I'd hoped. Vanessa got bolder. She stopped being careful with the camera in the room. Daniel started talking about the future more openly, asking me questions about the company, the accounts, the will. "We just want to make sure everything's in order, Dad," he said one night. "For your peace of mind." For my peace of mind, I almost laughed. While they watched me decline, I went to work in secret. I found a new attorney, a sharp woman named Coleman who had no connection to my family or my old company lawyer. In her office, far from home, I rebuilt my entire estate from the ground up. Everything I owned, the company shares, the properties, the accounts, the investments, I moved into an irrevocable trust. I named beneficiaries they would never guess and structured it so that not $1 could pass to Daniel or Vanessa under any circumstance. Not if I died, not if I was declared incompetent, nothing. Then I dealt with the company. I called a private meeting with my board, people I'd worked beside for decades, people I trusted. I didn't tell them everything, only that I had reason to protect the business from family interference. We arranged the controls so that Daniel had no path to ownership or authority, no matter what happened to me. The company I bled for would never end up in their hands. And then I lied to them carefully. I let Daniel and Vanessa believe the opposite of all this. I had Coleman draft a simple, fake will, the kind of clean document a trusting old father would leave. It named Daniel as the sole heir. It left everything to him and through him to Vanessa. I accidentally left it on my desk where I knew she'd find it. A few days later, I noticed it had been moved. Photographed, probably. Good. After that, the mood in the house shifted. They were patient now, almost kind. Why rush a sick old man who'd already left them everything? All they had to do was wait for nature, with a little help, to take its course. They thought they were close to the finish line. They had no idea they were standing exactly where I wanted them. I made one mistake. I assumed they would stay patient. A week after the fake will disappeared from my desk, something changed in the house. Vanessa started preparing richer meals, heavier drinks, more of everything. I didn't understand why at first. Then it hit me. They weren't waiting anymore. With the will in hand, they had no reason to drag it out. They wanted me gone faster. I kept dumping the food and pouring out the drinks, but I underestimated how thorough she'd become. One evening, she handed me a glass of wine to celebrate your retirement properly, she said, and stood there watching. She didn't leave. There was no plant, no sink, no chance to dump it. I had a choice. Refuse and raise suspicion or drink. I took a small sip, just one. I told myself one sip couldn't matter. I was wrong. Within 2 hours, I was on the bathroom floor, the room spinning, my chest tight, my body shutting down in a way it never had before. Whatever she'd put in that glass was a far heavier dose than the slow trickle she'd been feeding me for months. She wasn't poisoning me gradually anymore. She was finishing it. I managed to call an ambulance myself before I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed with Dr. Patel standing over me, his face grim. The blood work from my admission was off the charts. He told me plainly that if I'd swallowed the full glass, I wouldn't have woken up at all. Here is the strange thing. As terrible as that night was, it was the best evidence I could have asked for. There was now a hospital record, an emergency admission, a toxicology report with a date and a timestamp, all pointing to a massive dose administered at home on a night Vanessa served me a drink and watched me take it. Combined with my months of records, the camera footage, and Reyes's report on her first husband, the case was no longer just strong. It was airtight. Daniel and Vanessa came to the hospital, of course. They played the part. Vanessa held my hand and cried. Daniel stood by the window, looking pale. "We were so scared, Dad," he said. I looked at my son's face and saw the truth underneath the worry. He wasn't scared I'd die. He was scared I almost had before everything was finalized, in a hospital full of doctors asking questions. I let them perform. I squeezed Vanessa's hand and thanked her for calling for help, even though I'd called myself. I let them think I was too weak and too foolish to suspect a thing. But lying in that bed, I made two decisions. The first was that I would let them believe this near miss had nearly worked, that I was now truly at the edge. The second was that it was time to end this. I had one more call to make, to an old friend who would help me close the trap for good. The old friend I called was Frank, the same fishing buddy Vanessa had cut off months ago. What I'd never told anyone in that house was that Frank spent 30 years as a county prosecutor before he retired. When I laid it all out for him, the blood work, the footage, the hospital report, Reyes's file on her first husband, he went very quiet. Then he said, "We do this right, and they don't walk away from it." He made some calls. Within days, I had a meeting with a detective from the Financial and Major Crimes Unit, off the record at first, then very much on it. They reviewed my evidence, they believed me, and they agreed to a plan. The plan was a dinner. I came home from the hospital and announced it myself. I told Daniel and Vanessa that the scare had changed me, that I wanted to put my affairs in order while I still could. I said I wanted a quiet family dinner at the house that Friday to formally sign my will in front of my attorney and make everything official. I watched the look they exchanged. They thought they'd won. "That's a wonderful idea, Dad," Vanessa said. "I'll cook your favorite." "I'm counting on it," I said. Over the next few days, the house buzzed with a kind of cheerful energy I hadn't seen in months. Vanessa was kind to me, patient, almost glowing. Daniel kept squeezing my shoulder, calling me Dad more than he had in years. They were celebrating already. To them, this dinner was the finish line, the night the estate became theirs in writing, after which a frail, poisoned old man could quietly pass at any time and no one would ask too many questions. What they didn't know was who else would be at that dinner. Attorney Coleman would be there with documents, but not the documents they expected. Frank would be there, introduced as an old friend stopping by. And outside, parked down the street and around the corner, were the detective and his people waiting for a signal we had agreed on in advance. The kitchen camera was still in place, still recording. I'd added a second one in the dining room that afternoon while the house was empty. Friday came, Vanessa cooked all day. The house smelled like a holiday. She set the good table, the one Linda used to set, and I had to swallow my anger looking at it. That evening, we sat down together. Coleman at one end with a folder, Frank beside me, calm and watchful. Daniel and Vanessa across from us, dressed up, smiling, expectant. Vanessa stood to pour the drinks. She'd prepared a special toast, she said, to my health and my legacy. She handed everyone a glass of wine. Mine she set down in front of me with both hands, gently, like it was a gift. To family, she said, raising her glass. Everyone lifted their drinks. I looked down at the glass in front of me. Then I looked up at her and I smiled. Before we drink, I said, there's something you should all see. I set my glass down without drinking and pushed it to the center of the table. I'm not going to drink that, I said. I haven't had a single thing my daughter-in-law made in over 2 months. Not the coffee, not the tea, not the food. I poured all of it down the sink. A smile froze on Vanessa's face. Daniel's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Dad, what are you talking about? He said. I nodded to Frank, who opened a folder and slid the first pages across the table. That's my blood work, I said. From my retirement day and from the night I almost died in this house. Heavy metal poisoning, administered in small doses over many months. Then one large dose in a glass of wine Vanessa watched me drink. I reached for my phone and turned the screen toward them. I played the footage. Vanessa at the counter, taking out the little bottle, measuring the clear liquid into my coffee, stirring it, wiping the spoon. Her own face, calm and deliberate, lit up on the screen for everyone to see. You had a camera, she whispered. The warmth was gone from her voice completely. I had several, I said. Then I looked at my son. This was the part I had dreaded. And you, Daniel, you knew. I have footage of you standing in that kitchen watching her do it, and you said nothing. You let her poison your own father. My voice didn't shake. I'd used up all my shaking months ago. I kept hoping the footage would show me wrong. It never did. Daniel's face crumpled. Dad, it wasn't. She said it would just make you tired, that we needed you to slow down. I didn't know it would. You knew enough, I said. And he stopped because there was nothing to say. Frank slid the next file forward. Your wife has done this before, I told Daniel. Her first husband, an older man, dead 2 years into the marriage. You married a woman who marries men, kills them, and takes their money. You were next in line to be a widower, son. And then, eventually, so would you have been disposable. Vanessa shoved her chair back and stood. This is insane. None of this proves anything. She looked at the door. I wouldn't, Frank said quietly. There are detectives outside. Have been all evening. Right on cue, there was a knock at the front door. Then another. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room like an animal looking for a gap in a fence. There wasn't one. One more thing, I said as Coleman opened her folder. The will you photographed off my desk, it was a fake. I built it for you. The real estate, the company, every dollar I own was placed in a trust 2 months ago. You can't touch it. You were never going to touch it. The door opened. The detective stepped inside. Vanessa started screaming. Daniel just sat there, staring at the glass of wine that had been meant for me. They took Vanessa out in handcuffs that night. She was still shouting that we had it all wrong as they walked her to the car. The wine glass she'd set in front of me was bagged as evidence. The lab confirmed later what we already knew. One full glass would have killed me. Combined with the footage, the months of blood work, the hospital record, and Reyes's file on her first husband, the case against her was overwhelming. Her trial didn't last long. The first husband's family came forward too, finally able to say what's suspected for years. She is going to spend the rest of her life in prison, and she will never see a dollar of anyone's money again. Daniel was arrested that night as well, my son. I won't pretend that part didn't break something in me that hasn't fully healed. He took a deal, testified about what he knew and when, and got a lesser sentence for his role. He'll be out one day, a younger man than I am now, with a long time to think about the night he watched his wife pour poison into his father's cup and decided money mattered more. He wrote me a letter from inside, pages of apology, of explanation, of asking to talk. I read it once. I haven't written back. Maybe someday I will. Some wounds you can forgive but never undo, and I'm not there yet. I may never be. The trust held exactly as Coleman built it. Not 1 cent reached Daniel or Vanessa. The company I spent 30 years building is in good hands. Run by the people who stood beside me, the ones Vanessa tried so hard to keep me away from. I kept a quiet seat on the board and nothing more. I'd earned my rest, and this time I actually took it. As for the money, I did something with it that finally felt right. I set up a foundation in Linda's name. It helps elderly people who are isolated and being taken advantage of by the very people meant to care for them. It turns out I was not nearly as alone in what happened to me as I'd believed. There are a lot of us. Now there's somewhere for them to turn. Frank and I fish most weekends. I eat dinner with friends who never wanted a thing from me except my company. I cook my own breakfast every morning in a kitchen that finally feels like mine again, and I pour my own coffee and I drink the whole cup without thinking twice. I plan to retire on the day my doctor told me my family was killing me. For a while, it felt like the end of everything I'd built and everyone I had left. It wasn't. It was the day I got my life back. They wanted me quiet, gone, and forgotten so they could spend what I built. Instead, I'm the one still here, and I'm the one laughing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.